Hello and welcome to today's video. So today we're going to be learning about macromolecules. So as the word macro is part of the word macromolecules, it means big. So these are sort of like the big four molecules that are present in pretty much all living things inside our cell. So we're going to start off with carbohydrates. So carbohydrates contain 3 atoms. Well, a combination of just 3 atoms. Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Proteins contain a combination of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Lipids, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. And nucleic acids, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. Okay, so it's cho, chon, chomp. So it's cho, chon, cho, chnomp. Okay, so this helps us memorize what all atoms are present in each of the macromolecules. So now I've named the 4 macromolecules. But what do they actually do? Carbohydrates give us energy. These include breads, biscuits, glucose. That's carbohydrates. Proteins give us structure, and proteins include milk, eggs, cheese. Milk, eggs, cheese. Lipids give us stored energy, the key word being stored. And examples of lipids include oil and butter. And nucleic acids have our DNA. Have our DNA and our RNA, which contain our genetic information. This is the information that gets passed on from generation to generation. Okay, so now we know a broad overview of what these all do. So let's go into just a little bit more detail. Now we are going to learn some key facts about each of these macromolecules. So before that, we have to learn something called a monomer and a polymer. So a monomer is just one of a molecule. Polymer is many parts of a molecule. So polymer is formed by many monomers. So each of these macromolecules have a basic structure which only contains one of these macromolecules. That's, as we just learned, would be the monomer. And several of that individual type of macromolecule combine together to form the polymer. So we're going to start with carbohydrates. So in carbohydrates, the monomer is known as a monosaccharide. And the polymer is known as a polysaccharide. So an easy way to remember this is that mono means one, poly means many, and saccharide means sugar. So it's one, literally in its definition it tells us what it is, because monosaccharide is one sugar, polysaccharide is many sugars. So as I just said, is that a polysaccharide is a bunch of monosaccharides linked together. So what is this link? What is the name of the link that holds this? This link is known as a glycidic bond. Glycidic bonds are what hold several monomers together to form a polysaccharide. So one example of a monomer that you've probably heard of is glucose. So glucose is an example of a monosaccharide, and several glucose combine together to form glucogen, which is a polysaccharide. This is one example of a carbohydrate. As I just mentioned, both carbohydrates and lipids both contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. But how do we differentiate them? It's because carbohydrates are always in the formula. So N is a variable, so it will change. But what this formula means that for every carbon and oxygen molecule in a carbohydrate, there will always be 2 hydrogen molecules. So basically, there will always be a double the number of hydrogen molecules than carbon and oxygen molecules, and this is the structure of carbohydrates. Now, let's go to lipids. So the structure of a lipid is actually pretty unique because it contains a glycerol head and a fatty acid tail. So in lipids, there's no clear monosaccharide and polysaccharide, but a structure of a lipid contains a glycerol head and fatty acid tails. So glycerol is a molecule that attaches to fast fatty acid tails, and many of these combine together and then they form our butter and our oil. But butter is a solid. Oil is a liquid. So how did that happen? This happened because of our fatty acid tails. If the fatty acid tail has no kinks, then it is called saturated. For example, butter. But if it has kinks, it would be like this. Kinks meaning a double bond between the carbo and hydrogen molecule. So multiple kinks causes an unsaturated. So unsaturated would then be like oil. So unsaturated are formed by kinks, and saturated have no kinks. And these kinks are double bonds. It's a double bond between a carbon and a hydrogen molecule. So lipids are stored energy, but there's one special type of lipid. So in our previous video, we learned about the cell membrane, which protects the outer part of the cell. Cell membranes are made of something called phospholipids. Phospholipids have a phosphate head instead of a glycerol head and fatty acid tails. And this gives the property, something called gives it a unique property called the amphiphilic property that helps form our cell membranes, and we'll go over this in more detail in later videos. Now let's learn about proteins. So proteins, we have singular proteins, and several proteins form amino acids. So proteins are actually a lot in our cells. Proteins are enzymes. Enzymes speed up reactions. Proteins are hormones. These are signaling cells that help manufacture proteins that are needed. But most amino acids have a very similar structure, which I'm going to draw out right now. So this is the structure of most amino acids. So this nitrogen and hydrogen group is known as the amino group. This COO group is known as the carboxyl group. And this R over here is the side chain. So in every amino acid, the amino group and the carboxyl group stays the same. It does not change. But what changes is the side chain, and it can be the addition of any molecule or any amino acid. So the side chain is what changes in all of our amino acids. So amino acids, as we mentioned, are mainly milk, eggs, and cheese. So now we're going to go over nucleic acids. Nucleic acids, in my opinion, are one of the coolest macromolecules because nucleic acids contain our DNA and RNA. So DNA stands for deoxyribose nucleic acid and RNA stands for ribose nucleic acid. So DNA and RNA are two genetic material. So DNA is double-stranded. It's a double helix structure. Whereas RNA is single-stranded. It is just one strand. Okay? So DNA and RNA, their monomer is called a nitrogenous base. So like proteins, nitrogenous bases have very similar structures. They have a 5-carbon sugar And sugars are usually in a circle. They're usually drawn and represented in a circle. They have a phosphate group. And they have the nitrogenous base, which I'm going to be drawing in this unique pattern. This is our 5' sugar, phosphate head, and nitrogenous base. Okay, so this is our monomer for DNA. So there are 4 different nitrogenous bases that we should know. And this nitrogenous bases are actually what helps us differentiate between DNA and RNA. So in DNA, the 4 nitrogenous bases are adenine, cytosine, thymine, and guanine. But in RNA, the 4 nitrogenous bases are adenine, cytosine, uracil, and guanine. So there's a reason why I've written it one after another. It's because adenine and thymine bond together, and cytosine and guanine bond together. And in RNA, as you can imagine, adenine and uracil bond together, and cytosine and guanine bond together. So now what I mean by bond together is this is how I've drawn a nitrogenous base. We're going to zoom in right here. So this is one of our nitrogenous base. We're going to assume this is adenine, represented with the A over here. Then thymine is going to be represented like this. So like a lock and a key, they're going to attach together and form a bond. So that's it for macromolecules today. I hope you learned a lot. So in conclusion, we learned about the 4 macromolecules, which are carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. And we learned about their functions and their unique structures. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.